Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. We're so glad to see you here joining us today for this session. So glad to have you all in our audience. Thank you to everyone who is already writing in and telling us where they're joining from. We have Andre from Ontario, Canada, Michelle from Midwest USA, Neville from Hull City, Lucia from Portugal, Phoebe from Sweden, Janine from Tennessee. So thank you all for joining us. We're so glad to see you here in our audience. Before we begin with today's session, I'll just let you know about a few things that we have going on here at MyHeritage. It's been quite busy lately, so we have a few things going on. We have a fabulous DNA sale for MyHeritage DNA kits on now. And so we'll put a link to that in the comment section so that you can all take advantage and purchase DNA kits for yourselves, for your family members, friends, anyone that's on your list, on your gift list. So that's our DNA sale. Today we announced a competition, a back-to-school competition at MyHeritage, where we're asking you to dig up those old back-to-school photos that you may have of yourself, of your ancestors, and take them and use one of the MyHeritage photo tools on them, whether it be colorizing the photos, enhancing them, or even using our Deep Nostalgia animation tool on the photo. And then share it on social media. And we'd love to see those photos, those old back-to-school photos. So please share them with us. And I've put a link in the comment section so you can all take a look at our back-to-school competition. And we'll be giving away 3 complete plans to the winners of that competition. So dig up those old back-to-school photos. I know it's back to school season. So even if you are not going back to school and no one in your family is, or maybe they are, maybe you have children, grandchildren, neighbors, friends that are going back to school this season, but we'd like to see your family photos of going back to school, your old school photos. So we're looking forward to seeing a lot of those come in. In addition, we're going to be giving away a MyHeritage Complete Plan to one lucky winner in the audience today. So to enter, all that you have to do is leave a comment or a question in the comments section. And we'd love to hear how you use MyHeritage for your research, what types of records you've researched on MyHeritage and how they've helped you. Or a question for our speaker today, and we'll be giving away one complete plan at the end of today's show. So for those of you who don't know, a MyHeritage Complete Plan is the best plan that we have to offer at MyHeritage. It'll give you unlimited access to 14 billion historical records and counting. We're adding millions of records each week here at MyHeritage, new collections being added all the time. It will also give you unlimited access to MyHeritage photo tools. That's the MyHeritage Photo Enhancer, MyHeritage in Color, Deep Nostalgia, and unlimited family tree size, and so much more to that complete plan. So we're excited to be able to give that away today, and we look forward to seeing your comments and questions. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker. We have with us James Tanner, a great friend of MyHeritage, and just such a pleasure to have on our show. He joins us often, and we're always so thrilled when he's able to come on and speak with us. So let me bring him on, and he can say hello in person.
Hello.
We have an audio problem, folks.
Yeah.
Here, I just muted you for a moment, James, and let's see if we can sort that out. Sorry about that, folks. We're just gonna try and work out the audio. Of course, it wouldn't be a Facebook Live without some minor technical difficulties. Here, let's try again. I'll unmute you again, James. How's that? Oh, we can't hear you now. Okay, we're working this out, and we're gonna see what we can do. So Just give us a few moments, folks. James, there's a small cogwheel on top of your name where you can access the settings for the microphone and for the audio. So maybe we can change something there, and that will help. In the meantime, I see a great comment here from Michelle, and she says, I have had great success with MyHeritage. I have over 700 relatives back to the 1600s so far. Amazing, Michelle. We love to hear about all the success that our users have with their discoveries. We see here Maureen has said, I love MyHeritage. I've been a member for years. My husband died in August 13th, 2021. I've been informed I'm at a limit of how many people. I'm so sorry to hear, Maureen, and we'll be in touch after. And just, let's see, Cindy says, I love the fact that on MyHeritage you can track down DNA from other countries. So indeed, MyHeritage is quite global, and we have users from all over the world, which is just so incredible. Let's see if we can get this audio issue fixed again. Any luck, James? Oh, we still can't hear you. Hopefully soon, folks. We're just working this out, and hopefully. Oh, I see. Shelley says sometimes you can only have one Zoom call on in a house without more routers. So definitely an issue that most of us have experienced this past year, with lots of Zoom calls and online sessions that we've had, that many of us have had. Let's see. I see Tracy says, Tracy says, I'm a newbie and I just traced my ancestors back to 1100. Amazing. That's quite incredible, Tracy. Good for you. Lynette says, I like how MyHeritage has broken down the groups, but I'm having a hard time finding about one area that isn't available. So definitely, we do have 2,114 genetic groups in our DNA test, and hopefully, adding more and increasing our resolution all the time. So we hope that. Chris says, yeah, I think maybe there's an issue with the settings, James. If you just look on top of your name in BeLive, there's a little settings button, and you can change where we've lost him. So we're still working on this, and hopefully we'll get James back up and running. We apologize for this technical difficulty, ladies and gentlemen, and hope that we have this fixed soon. So Myra said, I always wanted to know my DNA from far back. So definitely you're a candidate for a DNA test, and those of you that have taken DNA tests can tell Myra about the advantages and what you can find using a DNA test, and all the different everything that you can discover and how far back you can go. So it really is incredible. Let's see. We have Cindy, who says, now I've been working on using and understanding triangulation. Maybe one day I will understand it better. So we do actually have a Facebook Live that we did in the past on triangulation. Let's see. I think we have James back again. Hello.
Oh, yeah, for some reason. Let me just.
Maybe the window is open more than one. Oh, I think that works.
Did that take care of it? No, I've still got an echo.
Okay, we're still just working this out. Sorry, and hopefully we'll come to the bottom of this.
Okay, now it's
Is it open maybe in more than one window?
Yes. But that's going to leave.
Oh, okay. So I just muted you for a moment, James, so that we can work it out. And it looks like maybe there's more than one microphone or a fan. Maybe that's causing the echo. I don't know what it could be.
Let's see, I cut down everything. That's weird.
Maybe you have more than one computer that's open with it. I'm not exactly sure what it could be. Let's see if we can. Let's see, we're working this out, folks, and hopefully we can get this sorted soon and get it up and running. Oh, I see that we've lost him again, unfortunately, but I hope that he's coming soon. I apologize for this. We did a test right before and everything was working, and I think that's just the way it is sometimes. Okay.
Everything there is.
Oh, amazing, amazing. We can hear you perfectly now. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what that was. And we did, as I was telling everyone, we did a test right before and everything was fine, but I think that's just the way it is sometimes.
I have no idea. So,
okay. Great. So do you want to just jump right in then?
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
No, I think you just have to share it again. We don't see it.
Okay, let's see. Screen. There we go.
Okay, great. And if you could just introduce the topic, because I don't think we discussed what we're talking about today.
Okay, you should be able to see it now.
Perfect. We're all set.
Okay, well, sorry about the technical difficulties. That had me somewhat stumped. We are going to talk today about opening a new world of books and publications on MyHeritage. One of the things that I've noticed over the many years that I've been working on my genealogy and helping people and serving in family history centers and family history libraries is the tremendous amount of material there is. Just so many resources to use that most people are just initially at least overwhelmed. But one thing that is sort of uniformly ignored is that there are tens of thousands, perhaps as many as millions of books out there that have direct information that is very, very valuable to genealogical research. And interesting that we're going to see today, as I go through this presentation, how many tens of thousands of those books are available, even millions of pages of books available on the MyHeritage website. And yet I think people have sort of genealogists in general have sort of I don't know, they kind of ignore the books that are out there. And I think it's important that we get some perspective. When we understand that in a world crowded with computers, it's important to realize that a lot of your interest, almost all of your ancestral information, comes from paper-based sources. That's the reason why the large websites have huge digitization projects, because they're still incorporating all of those digitized records into a format that can be used and looked and researched online. So basically what I'm trying to communicate here is that even though a lot of the information is digitized and millions of books have been digitized, the genealogists still have this idea that books are old books are out of date, so therefore we don't need to look at them. Well, genealogy and history do never go out of date. There's just nothing. There are books that were written years ago are still just as valid as today. So I'm always amazed about how little books are used by most genealogists. While working in the library at Brigham Young University, in the family history library there, this is one of my common themes. And one day, one of the other volunteers came running up to me and said, look, look, look. And I said, look at what? She said, there's someone using a book. And they just realized that so few people, even when they're sitting in a library with a lot of books available right there, that they're still not being able to be used. Fortunately, MyHeritage has many solutions for searching in books. And I'm going to go through not all of them by any means. There simply isn't enough time in the presentation to talk about all the books, but the number of pages is going to be overwhelming, and the number of sources are phenomenal here. And these are valuable sources. Normally, you would not look at these unless they came up as record hints, but I'd encourage everyone when they're doing research to use the little link above your people on your family tree that says search or search for this person, so that you can get further information that may be not captured by the record matches that come up when you are working with your family tree. This first collection that shows up on the slide is called a compilation of published sources. These are all MyHeritage collections. And if you go into the collection, view the catalog collection on MyHeritage, you can see all of the different collections, and there's a filter that you can filter to look for books or publications. And then they will bring up a list. The website brings up a list of just those sources that involve books. And in that case, there are very many of those. This one has 84 million, more than 84 million pages of information. And they're family and local and military histories, county and city directories, school and university and hospital reports, church and congregational minutes, all sorts of records that may contain information about your ancestors that are way outside of the normal records that you would think of as census and vital records and the other records that genealogists rely on for information. And here's a screenshot of me when I did a search and filtered out for books. In this case, we have 329 collections. That was at the time. I mean, they may have been more at any time, but this was what was available then. These are whole collections of books, and like the first one I showed, they may have millions of pages. If you look down the list here, you'll see that Finland Church Census and Pre-Confirmation books have 33 million records. And below that are Slovakia Church and Synagogue books for 32 million records. As you think about records, genealogically valuable records, what you may be used to is the kind of record you get if you request a certificate. If you request a birth certificate or a marriage certificate or a death certificate. But most of the world's books before digitization and before microfilm were recorded by entries into books, big folio books. The ones that I've worked with in digitizing records at the Maryland State Archives were very large books, and they weighed about 25 to 30 pounds a piece. They were massive books. And these were the ones that had all of the copied probate records into them. And so when we think of going into and looking at books, we need to expand our idea. It's not just going into your public library and looking at books on the shelves in a public library, but we're talking about books that have been privately published, books that have been accumulated because of entries that are being made in the books, like church books. All of these books have great value, but in the collections that are on MyHeritage, there are a lot of books that are outside of the ones commonly used and commonly indexed and seen by people if they get outside of the websites that have these digital book collections. So these, like I mentioned, 329. So what are we looking for? What kinds of things are out there on these books that are helpful? And I just thought I'd review some of the topics of these books and introduce you into the ideas here of what kinds of information might be involved. Probably the number one book for genealogists are surname books, and I'm going to start at the top here and kind of come down and summarize each one of these categories. But the surname books include books that are privately created by families, detailing an ancestor, the pedigree back to an ancestor, or coming the other way from a famous or original ancestor from whatever type, and detailing the descendants of that ancestor. And the surname books generally follow a specific original surname. I and my family have a number of these, and as we go through the presentation, I'll show you some ways to find those books. But surname books can be very valuable, and they date way back into history. There are compilations that go back 100, 200, 300, even more years of detailing the history of a particular family line. The next category are biographies, and that's kind of self-evident, explains itself. A biography is a book written about a particular person or a particular family, and has merit for genealogy research because it may have a detailed account of a family that you're related to. So you need to make sure that somebody back in your ancestral line didn't happen to have a biography written about that person. I think one of the things that probably dissuades genealogists from looking at these various kinds of books is the fact that almost none of these are cataloged under any cataloging library cataloging method that identifies them as genealogy books. So they're not in the genealogy section. When you go to the genealogy section, very few of these, unless the library specifically has an interest in genealogy, has really categorized any of these books as genealogy books. History books of all kinds, remembering that people write histories about all sorts of places. Here in the United States, we have we'll divide our states are divided into counties and then into municipalities and cities. There are individual books chronicling the history of the cities. There's books on the counties, there's books on the states, and each one of these books may contain information about your ancestors. If you go around the world, you'll find the same kinds of books. It just seems incredible that we as genealogists would not realize that we can go look for a history book that might already tell us the history of our family because they lived in a particular community. Compiled pedigrees are a little bit different than surname books because they include a lot of information about different families, and they may have all the information about interrelated people. In this case, there's studies that have been made and books that have been written about individual cultures and individual cultural groups. And in those, they have included a pedigree, a discussion of the the people who are related in that particular culture. Some of these come up even in anthropology and sociology and other types of academic pursuits. Bibles, family Bibles, are very valuable records. For many years, people recorded all of their ancestry, births and deaths in their family Bibles. Very common in Western European and in the United States. Autobiographies, the same as biographies, although written by a single individual, and can contain a considerable amount. During the past week, one of my friends, who I have been friends with for years, completed a book of the life of his life story, and that book contains his ancestry. And so he shows and tells stories and relates information about his ancestors. These books are sometimes self-published and sometimes only available in extremely small printings, but they can be collected, and oftentimes they show up in these large collections. Family memories, and they're in the same, and diaries and journals, all those are in the same category as are compilations of letters. Directories are a different category. They are books that some of us who are old enough remember there were used to be paper phone directories. I think they still publish those in some places. Here in Utah, we haven't seen any. We do get one from the city of Provo about once a year, which we quickly dispose of because we don't use those anymore. But those were the mainstay of locating and finding people. And before telephones, there were city directories, and city directories actually go back to the 1600s. And yearbooks are another category of books, and that are usually published by academic institutions from here in the United States. The yearbook tradition used to be something that was done with secondary education, what we call the high schools here in the United States, but have now spread to grade schools and even into preschools. So you never know what kind of information you may find. So I'm going to focus on some of the MyHeritage collections that you may never have noticed or used, because I think it's important to see what kinds of information may come out as you're looking for your ancestors. This is a set of books called Historical Books, Index of Authors and Peoples Mentioned from 1811 to 2003. There are 494 million plus book records in 3+ million books. That's a collection of books that would probably be about the number of books in the average university or college library in the United States. Not particularly large, nothing like the largest libraries. To give some ideas of the size, the largest library claims at least to be the largest library in the world, the Library of Congress here in the United States, has somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 million books. But that is a very different situation, because most libraries and most public libraries in the country would have far fewer than these books. And what this does is it is a all names catalog of everything in these books that is a name of a person that was mentioned in all of these different historical books. So it's worth searching, and it's worth using this on the offhand chance that one of your ancestors or many of your ancestors found their way into one of these historical books. Okay, so I did a search, and I did this in this Historical Books Index of Authors and People. And in that index, I looked for my surname. And there were over 11,000 results for people mentioned with my surname. And I immediately started looking down the books, and almost everything, at least everything on this first page of records, actually was my family. So the number of people who are in these books can be surprising. So all of these books came from 1905 to 1923 are about my family. And that was a very interesting discovery. So I mentioned a moment ago that some people depreciate or do not value older books because they feel like they're out of date. Well, that may work if you are talking about technology. For example, a book written about a computer program that is 10 years old is probably not much use, probably has no value at all, as a matter of fact, because it is highly unlikely that over a 10-year period that, that any one of the computer programs would either be still in existence, or if they were, they would have changed so substantially that the book would not be very much use. However, history doesn't change. History is history. And if you have a very old book, it is very helpful. The older, the better, because books that were written in many years ago contained information that was contemporaneous at the time. So, for example, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but I want to emphasize this point more than once, and that is a book that was written, for example, in the 1880s could have information going back to the 1700s, which was firsthand taken from people who actually lived in the 1700s, and so forth. And so further back you go is not less helpful, it's more helpful. But how reliable are the books? That's always a question. One of the issues that you find with many surname books particularly is that they pass on family traditions, and they tell stories about the ancestors that may or may not be verified. So, one of the points that you get to when you start looking at these old books is to look carefully to see whether the sources are cited. Now, the source may just be simply all of the information that the person gathered from the people around that they knew or talked to, and it may not, depending on the degree of whether or not it was done academically or just gathered for a community effort or an individual. There may not be any footnotes, there may not be a list of sources, there may not be any way of knowing where that information came from. But the information that's contained in the books is still is valuable because it gives you a starting point to look for your ancestors. If you have no idea who the names were or where they lived, and you find a book that tells where they came from and what their names were, you may then have a head start in doing research that otherwise would take you a very long time. And that's essentially what happened with when I started doing research about 40 years ago. And that was that I had a set of books. This was the only real connection I had to genealogy. I had a set of books that came for some of my families, one of my ancestral families. I had a book about my Overson and DeFries ancestors. I had a book about my Tanner ancestors. And these two books, between these two books, because my father, they both were my father's families, but my mother and father were related through an adoption, and so both my mother's ancestors and my father's ancestors show up in these same books. So it seems like a quite an interesting situation. But this was my only connection that I had with genealogy up until the time that I began actively doing research and and seeking out and verifying some of the information that was in those books. And just to reinforce what I said a moment ago, a genealogy book written in 1880 can contain firsthand information about people who were born in the 1700s. You really need to think about that and realize that the older books and the older records may not be as accurate as we wish they were, but on the other hand, they were based on based on traditions, but on the actual experiences and memories of people who were alive at the time the book was written. And so many of those things are valuable just from the standpoint of the stories and the information that is preserved, um, even though it may not be strictly as accurate as we want it to be. The kinds of things that we think about in accuracy in genealogy, such as an accurate birth date or an accurate marriage date, are things that were not as important to people previously. And the fact that there was a marriage or the fact that these two people were related is probably more important back in before we began keeping these kinds of records that we do today. One thing you can do is search for a specific person. So here again, I'm going to search another collection, the compilation of public sources. And in this collection, I'm going to look for my great-great-great-grandfather, John Tanner, who was born in 1778 in Rhode Island. And I immediately found a number of books and a number of other records, like a civil and military list of Rhode Island and vital records of Rhode Island that you normally would not know about and may well have information about your ancestors. Now, one thing that you have to be careful of when you're doing this kind of research, and any research, is that in this case, John Tanner happens to be a fairly common name in Rhode Island. There were a lot of Tanners, and they're not all related. At the time when I've traced back to my original Tanner, there were as many as 10 different people that had the same name. His name was William Tanner, and we haven't completely identified him or distinguished him and figured out which of the almost 12 people there were in different records who appear to be different people with the name of William Tanner at the same time in Rhode Island. So it was probably a very popular name. So you can't assume simply because John Tanner shows up with a 1778 time frame that all of these people are actually related. But once again, it does give you a very much a good place to start. And as you do more research, you may find out that, well, yeah, maybe I should go look at the military records and lists and see if my ancestor was involved in any kind of a militia or military organization back in the 1700s. So this is kind of the information. So this one, for example, would be a very, very good for me to look at. And interestingly, because the other names that are in this, a couple of those names, Barber and Kenyon, which can be Kenyon also, are also names that show up in my family. So these are, perhaps there's even more relatives here, and this would have, if this is not the right John Tanner, then perhaps other ones will be. But it's very likely with the association here that we have, and the county is absolutely the county where he lived. He may actually be this person. So this would be a very interesting one to look at. As we get going along further, remember that finding one book will lead to additional books and records across the internet. That's what I'm trying to say here when I say it gives me thoughts to look at military records, because there's going to be additional books out there and additional records that I will need to look at when I have this key or cue from a published source that tells me that my ancestor may have participated in that activity. One of the things you'll see in a lot of older surname books after the 1850s, of course, when they invented photography, was that there will be sometimes photos or even pen and ink drawings or other kinds of drawings of the people in the books. And those can become valuable because they may be the only representation that you have of the people that you are researching. One of the things we always give you the kind of the analogy of a needle in a haystack, and in this case, the idea here is to always have a specific search objective. Just simply looking through books for possibly names is it's probably not helpful. And that's where MyHeritage comes in, because these books are indexed and have been subject to text identification. And they have been able to look there through the optical character recognition software. They've been able to identify and write programs that will pull out the names and give those names that can be then searched. So it's very helpful that you can go through and look for the names in the books specifically. So far, those books that I've mentioned are very broad. They're very broad categories. But when we look at further down the list of books on MyHeritage, we see another category of books. And if you'll see the cataloging there above that says all collections, then it's been down filtered to histories, memories, and biographies, and then filtered to family histories. And what you get there is a book with a little over almost 2,000 records of the biographic annuals of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And this was published back in 1903. That's now more than 100 years ago, and it gets older every day, obviously, and or just around 100 years ago. And we are looking at a record that may have information that goes back well into the 1800s. Lancaster County, another thing you need to kind of realize when you're looking at these books is to remember location, because the location, Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, early on was one of the larger counties and was carved up into smaller counties. So it would be helpful to look at this, because the early settlers may have been early settlers in a lot of different counties that have now been formed from the original Lancaster County. That's just something that you need to keep in the back of your minds whenever you're working with any kind of a historical record that refers to a geographical location, is that location may have changed. And then you have histories, memories, and biographies. This is another category. And these can link to family lines and show relationships and show how many and stories about the family. What is interesting is that one of the problems of doing early research, when I mean going back into the 1700s and even the 1600s, is that it's harder and harder to differentiate people. They may be identified by name, but there is nothing else that seems to help to identify that person by name. So it would be really helpful to read a history or a memoir or a biography of a person where additional information is provided that would let us know perhaps the religion or the occupation or the cultural background of the person, so we could differentiate between various people with the same name. So the more information you have about the what was happening to that person at the time, even if it doesn't mention the person directly, may help you. For example, if you find out in the history that there was a plague, or there was a civil disturbance or a war, all of those things may affect who your ancestors were and where they lived and what happened to them. Now, there's a couple of surprises out there, and I was kind of surprised to see some of these records show up. Hoover Dam construction workers, pioneer families of Boulder City, Nevada, from 1929 to 36. Obviously, a very, very narrow focus of a book, but you may find your ancestors lived in Nevada and actually end up finding that they were construction workers. And or if the family came from Nevada, they may have been in this and lived in Boulder City. And other specific books like the old records of Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and the genealogy and memorial history of the state of New Jersey. So a lot of time, the question I ask people is, as they say, well, they moved to Ohio in 1835. And I go, well, where did they live? Well, they lived in this town. Then you need to look at the local history, because they may very well have been one of the very first settlers in that area. And that would be a reason. They may have been the first people who immigrated to England, or that that were refugees from some other part of the world. And those conditions may all be chronicled in the written books. This is back to general collections. There are 6,000 collections with 14 billion records in the collection catalog on MyHeritage, and you can sort them by various categories: the number of records, how new they are, things like that. And then on the side, you can see the categories. And if you go down, you'll see books and publications, and directories, guides, and references, and histories, memories, and biographies of all the different types of books or records that you can focus on as you're doing your research on MyHeritage. So when you select a category, and then you can refine that category further by the location. So you can get down to the number of books that may be available from any particular location in the book. And kind of as a side note, you can do this same process to some extent in all of the larger online genealogy websites, and very quickly tell how many records in any specific category they may have, so you know whether or not there are a lot of records on the subject you're looking at, or very few records, and that will reflect the area of interest of the country to some extent. So here in this particular one, I brought it down to a very narrow category, and that's where I got some information that was different in a collection. So that brought it down from 4 million records down to a little over around almost 3,000 records, which was a lot simpler. So important to evaluate all books and publication sources for accuracy, source citations, and consistency with other research. Just because it's in a book does not mean that it's correct, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean it isn't correct. So it's important that you go out and look at other sources that are suggested by the categories that of the information that appears in the books, to make sure it's consistent with all the other research that you do. Just because the book says that this person was famous and rich does not necessarily mean that the same person with the same name in your family was that famous and rich person. Your person may have had exactly the same name and not been the famous and rich person with that name. But sometimes they are. And that's what makes genealogy interesting. Just a little admonition here, always record and cite your sources. Be sure that you attach the sources to your people in your family tree. If you haven't started a family tree, please do so. Please start collecting information and attaching the sources that are found. Evaluate and attach the sources that record matches that come from the records that come from MyHeritage. And from any other website, make sure that you are using, or that you're being very careful to record the information that you find. There's a lot of reasons for that, but the most direct reason is you don't want to keep doing the same things over and over again. You really do want to make some progress in documenting and understanding your family, and it would be very, very good idea to record that information in a way that you can tell whether or not you've covered that same information previously. Okay, well, that sort of covers the information today, and I'm glad I was able to be here, despite all the technical difficulties of feedback that I couldn't figure out.
Okay. So thank you so much, James. And again, apologies to everyone in the audience about that slight technical difficulty that we had at the beginning, but we figured it out, and what a great presentation. So definitely worth waiting for. Thank you so much, James. We have a few questions, if that's okay, from the audience. And anyone else who hasn't put questions in and who has anything to ask James, please write in the comment section, and we hope that we can get to it. So the first question, James, we have is from Michelle, and she asks, I always have issues with records from Latvia. Do you have any hints for me?
That's one of the questions, because in the Eastern European countries, from historical, obviously have not been open and available so much to the Western world as other countries. And so we have a very short time period of dealing with, a relatively short time period of dealing with Eastern European countries. All I can say is I realize that MyHeritage is making a fairly substantial effort to gather records from Eastern Europe, and that will probably rectify itself over time. The only thing I can suggest from Latvia and those other countries ultimately is to contact and go to the archives directly and see what they have. Some of them do have good digital collections in their archives. Of course, you'd need to know a little bit of Latvian to get into that, but.
And stay tuned for the upcoming records that we are consistently adding. And of course, if you have your family tree up on MyHeritage, as James suggested, if you build your family tree and have it updated and maintained on MyHeritage, then you'll get record matches as we add new collections from Eastern Europe.
Yeah, another important thing is the smart matches, because especially in countries where you have limited access to records, if you get a smart match between you and an individual, someone who may be related to you or is related to you in Latvia, then you can contact them through MyHeritage and see if what kind of records they have access. I always point out they speak the language, they're in the country, and they probably know where the records are. And so it's extremely important in those categories to use the smart matches to your advantage when you're told you have a relative.
We actually have a number of user stories from users who received smart matches and then And then connected with relatives who had, let's say, photos of their grandparents or great-grandparents that they had never seen before, and information. So as you say, it's besides for them knowing where the records are, they also are just another source of information, just like the records, that could bring you new information that you can add to your tree. So definitely very, very useful. I saw a nice comment here about, let's see, it was about so many comments here to go through. Just again, a reminder here from Connie asks, I just logged in. Where do we find the books on the MyHeritage website?
They're in the collection catalog. If you go up to the right-hand corner of the screen, and click, you'll get on the search, you'll get a list of areas, and one is the collection catalog, and that will give you a listing of all the collections, and then you can use those filters that I showed to narrow that down to books or to the category of books that you want to look at, and that'll sort the catalog. And that'll give you a very quick way to get into all those particular records.
Excellent. Shelley said, I'm just starting off in genealogy. I only thought of history books, but I did not think of these other sources that you mentioned. Now I have even more things to research. I love all the information that I hear on this site. And with the speakers, with these speakers, I have a great opportunity to listen to. So thank you so much for joining, Shelley, and we're so glad that you are able to learn more. I saw a comment here about, here it is, books are a great tool for research. Family reunion books are held in most public libraries.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of those are, the books in those libraries are being digitized. And when I include the published sources, most of those published sources have come from large library collections. So they're just going to be put in. People always say, well, does that include the genealogy books? And I say, well, no, they keep them out because they don't want people to look at that. No, everything gets entered in. It just gets sucked in and eventually digitized and included. So there's lots of places to look.
Amazing. And let's see, we have a comment here from Cindy. She said, the book I just bought was for a generation, and it has my fourth great grandma in it. It says her name is Amanda, and the family Bibles and tombstones have her as Mandana, a different name, I guess, listed.
That could be very simply, it would depend on where the person was from. That may be the name she had in English or the name she had in her original language. So you might want to see where she was from, what part of the world.
Okay. So now James will give away a MyHeritage Complete Plan to one lucky winner. For those of you who don't win today, just to remind you, there's a link in the comment section to our back to school competition. And so there'll be 3 lucky winners from that competition. So lots of opportunities to win a MyHeritage Complete Plan if you're not a winner today, and we hope to see all your back to school photos. James, do you have a good back to school photo?
I don't think we ever took back to school photos.
No, or just a photo from university. Do you have any good photos from university?
I have some really old photos, yes.
So we'll have to get you to enter as well. It can be any photo, just a reminder to all of our viewers, it could be any photo. It doesn't have to be specifically from the back to school season back then. It could be from your school days, from university, from one of your ancestors going to school or graduating. And we can't wait to see all those fantastic photos that we receive. So now we'll just give away a MyHeritage Complete Plan to one lucky winner. The MyHeritage Complete Plan is the best plan we have to offer at MyHeritage, so this will be a great prize. And it goes to Bud, Lisa, Samson, Mass. So I don't know if it's Bud or Lisa. I don't know. Maybe it's a shared Facebook account. But they wrote, although I do not speak German, I bought a book about the town my family was from in Switzerland. And in the book, there was a hand-drawn picture of their family farm from the 1700s. Can you believe that, James?
Oh, that's probably what I'm saying we should be looking for, because that's what can happen.
It's gold. What a treasure. What a treasure to find. So congratulations, and we'll be in touch with you through private message to claim your prize. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And James, thank you so much for joining us. And what an amazing presentation. We love hearing about these collections that are sometimes overlooked and that we don't, that not all of our viewers are so acquainted with. So thank you again.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Have a good day, everyone.